Welcome to the Kiwi Rocket. Thank you very much. Today we have Claire Rogers and Dr. James Thorp here to discuss COVID-19 vaccines, a risk factor for cerebral thrombotic syndromes. So Claire, what made you decide to go down this research path for this paper?
So Dr. Thorp and Dr. McCullough and a couple of other researchers, we've worked together on a couple of separate papers involving the VAERS database, which is the CDC and FDA run passive surveillance system in the US. And so this was one of the follow-up papers to our landmark paper, which had to do with pregnancy and menstrual irregularities.
So what irregularities do you pick up from pregnancies and menstruation?
Well, that was a previous paper that totally separate symptoms that we looked into. So this was totally separate of that paper. This was purely based on cerebral thromboembolic adverse events.
And so you took that and you decided to run with this current paper. What were you hoping to find out of this research?
Well, we wanted to determine if there was an uptick in cerebral thromboembolic adverse reactions to the COVID-19 vaccines as compared to the influenza vaccines and all vaccines that are listed in that VAERS database. We did a population-based retrospective cohort study where we assessed these adverse events both after COVID-19 vaccines and then influenza as well as all vaccines. We used the dates of January 1st, 1990 through December 31st, 2023. And we extracted 12 symptoms from the VAERS database to look at and compare. Those 12 symptoms were cavernous sinus thrombosis, cerebral artery thrombosis, cerebral infarction, cerebral thrombosis, cerebral venous sinus thrombosis, cerebral venous thrombosis, embolic cerebral infarction, ischemic cerebral infarction, sigmoid sinus thrombosis, superior sagittal sinus thrombosis, thrombotic cerebral infarction, and transverse sinus thrombosis. And Joe, what we found when we queried the VAERS database was there was 5,137 cerebral thrombotic adverse events reported in 36 months after the COVID-19 vaccines. That was compared to 52 cerebral thromboembolic events reported in 408 months after the influenza vaccines, and then only 282 across those 408 months for all vaccines in the database.
Dr. Thorp, how many people do you think are impacted at the moment by those figures of all the different types of thrombotic embolisms?
Well, I mean, that's a great question, Joe. And this study, of course, from the VAERS data, we're not able to define a prevalence, but we do know that if we look at the complications of the vaccine, what we're certain of is that one of the main categories of morbidity, that is injury and death, is related to thromboembolism. That is a blood clot in the artery or a blood clot in the vein that may travel anywhere to the brain from the heart. I think for the research team that Claire and I and Dr. McCullough and our other colleagues in our research team in the group, we have focused on women of reproductive age, and we've also focused on pregnancy. And, you know, a couple of reasons for that. I guess I'm biased, and I've spent the last 45 years focusing on that group. But also there's another less, if you will, selfish reason for that. And that is that, you know, women of reproductive age bear the burden of these blood clots. And they're at significantly greater risk of having a blood clot for a variety of different reasons. And then, of course, pregnancy is one of those reasons, because women who become pregnant, pregnancy itself is one of the causes of increased blood clot risk. And one might look at that as, if you will, a teleological, the way God made us really is because, of course, delivering a baby is sometimes associated with a lot of blood loss. So that women who are pregnant are more what we call hypercoagulable, if you wish, using a longer word, have an increased risk of blood clot, a tendency of blood clot. Other clinicians will call that a thrombophilic state, the blood clotting type state. It's a natural blood clotting type state. So yeah, in women of reproductive age who are not pregnant, of course, many of them are on hormonal therapies as well, which too are associated with blood clots as well.
I guess that some people who are more ignorant or unscrupulous might misattribute that to their hormone replacement therapy rather than the vaccines. What other ways do you think they hide the vaccine damage from all the damage that's been caused by the coagulation and the thrombosis?
Yeah, how do they hide that? That's a great question, Joe. There's, of course, where you're located and where I'm located, and Claire and other countries, Australia, New Zealand, United States, Canada, United Kingdom, if you will, the so-called Five Eye countries. We seem to be the countries that are the most fascist in this misinformation. It's almost like a Leninist, Stalinist type of state-sponsored, this is the way it is, and anybody that deviates from this is hurting the state or hurting the vaccine efforts, and it won't be tolerated, and it's misinformation. These are the five countries that are most aggressive for that. And so that there's a lot of people that can't connect the dots, and they won't do so despite the explosion of blood clots, the explosion of myocarditis, the explosion of all these other complications. And they refuse to recognize it because of a whole myriad of reasons.
And Joe, if I may, we are not taught in our respective medical programs that vaccine injuries even exist. I mean, we are taught from early in our medical programs, PA programs, nursing programs, that vaccines, by virtue of them being called a vaccine, are safe and effective. That is pounded in our head from the very beginning of our programs. And so not only are we not aware that it happens, and it sounds silly now in retrospect, but we're not aware that vaccine injuries exist, but we don't know what to look for. We don't know how to report it. I did not know what the VAERS system even was up until a few years ago. And if you talk to most medical providers, many of them had never heard of VAERS prior to COVID, if they have even now at this point. So we aren't taught what to look for. We don't know how to identify it. We don't believe it even happens. And then we don't know how to handle it if we can't treat it, and we don't know how to report it.
Yeah, I did wonder how many cases of this are flying under the radar because doctors either don't know or don't actually bother putting it into VAERS in the first place.
Yeah, I think that the data from the morticians and the surgeons and the embalmers, both on your continent and on ours and in other continents, are really clear that, these very, very long blood clots that are being pulled out of patients who are still alive and who have passed away have never really been seen before. So this is, whether it's a very large blood clot or it's what they refer to as a microclot, a small blood clot, the prevalence has skyrocketed, Joe, absolutely skyrocketed, and as have vaccine injuries. And, I don't know how New Zealand is coming along, but I can tell you that most American citizens now, if you look at the Rasmussen poll, most American citizens know somebody that's been killed and or injured, and they are convinced themselves in the poll that it was caused by the vaccine. But here's this issue of state-sponsored misinformation, this fascist type thing. It kind of exactly like a Leninist, the USSR or a communist state is. you're not allowed to think certain ways and think, you're not allowed to be a free thinker, right? So that, people just are not allowed. There's too much political pressure, state pressure to come out and state the truth. So you have to play along with the game. And that fact is further attested to the fact that, the state is still lying. The government, our government, is lying and illegally, fraudulently making false claims that are illegal and criminal, actually, saying that the vaccines are safe, effective, and necessary for future strains. That's a gross lie. And nobody, 95% of Americans aren't taking these vaccines anymore. The uptake in 95% of Americans, only 5% of Americans or less are taking it. It's a single digit, pathetic percentage uptake. They're not taking it. They know the state's lying, but they're still silent.
In your opinion, do you think the CDC and the FDA are disguising the fact that their safety signals are being breached with the embolisms and other things?
Oh, 100%. And I wouldn't say I speculate, and it's my opinion. I can prove that. I can prove that beyond a shadow of a doubt. I don't know that time permits, but Dr. McCullough and my research team are just publishing a 3-part series now showing unequivocally that the New England Journal of Medicine, the Massachusetts Medical Society that owns the New England Journal of Medicine, and the CDC are corporately entangled in publishing fraudulent information, and did so in April of 2021, pushing fraudulent data saying that it was safe, effective, and necessary in pregnancy. That's a proven fact right now. And I've been saying that for a while. And I think that I'm happy to go on record as to state that these are criminal institutions that need to be taken down by civil or criminal litigation.
It's appalling. Claire, which part of the paper concerns you the most?
Probably the part that concerned me the most was just the sheer number of thromboembolic events. When you compare, 5,000, in excess of 5,000 compared to 282 across 408 months versus just 36 months. I mean, the dramatic increase. And like Dr. Thorp said, the cerebral venous thrombosis that is typically seen in a younger age group. I believe 37 is about the typical age, that we see that in. So you're talking about young women, young mothers, women of childbearing potential, like Dr. Thorpe mentioned. We did have a statistic in the paper that it was discussing the prevalence of cerebral arterial thrombosis versus cerebral venous thrombosis prior to the vaccines. So before the vaccines were rolled out, the prevalence of cerebral venous thrombosis compared to cerebral arterial thrombosis, the ratio was 1 to 62.5 cases. So, with our paper, we've demonstrated a significant increase in the cerebral venous thrombosis, which should not, when you look at the prevalence prior to these vaccines, it shows that there's definitely something very concerning signal that we are now seeing even more cases of CVT when it should be the CAT is far more common in the population.
That's so concerning. Dr. Thorpe, what is the most concerning part, if you haven't mentioned it already, about the paper for you?
I think that Claire touched on it, and I think you touched on it, Joe. I think that this is a morbidity and mortality that is much more likely in a young woman of reproductive age, which is the most important reproductively for the future of humanity. And how they can continue to perpetrate these crimes and hide the data and deny the data is just deeply concerning to me. The data that Claire, reviewed, goodness gracious, 5,137 blood clots just in the head, okay, not other parts of the body, just in the last 36 months, 3 years, compared with 52 in the preceding 34 years? This is a safety signal that is screaming, sirens, flashing, blaring red lights. And Rochelle Walensky, the director of the CDC, and Eric Rubin, the editor-in-chief of the New England Journal of Medicine, and others say, oh, there's nothing here. It's all safe. This is what they're going on record and saying. And it's interesting that the Centers for Disease Control, CDC, and the FDA of the United States of America, they're legally obliged to keep the vaccine adverse event registry going, VAERS event registry going, right? But that's their mandate. But and on record, as far back as 2021 in April, they said, oh, VAERS is really sensitive and it's very effective and safe. Well, they've tried to cheat and lie. And that's one of the papers that Claire and the rest of my research team is working on now. It's about to be published. We've outlined how they tried to hide it and obfuscate it. And they were really confident 3 years ago that they could do it because they were bragging about how sensitive it is, right? But the danger signal is so high, Joe, that they failed. So now what they're trying to do is, okay, paying other actors like Johns Hopkins University and these other, pilgrims of Harvard and UCFFD, the people that they're paying off with hundreds of millions of dollars to criticize and falsely villainize VAERS so they can move to closed systems that the public can't see, like the VSafe, the Vaccine Safety Data Link, the so-called VSD, and a third one called Biologic Effectiveness, BEST is the acronym. So these are closed surveillance systems. They failed to cheat and lie and obfuscate on VAERS, so they pay their state actors to discredit VAERS because they can't do it. And then they use that to go to more fascist, communist, Leninist systems that the public can't see that they can manipulate. That's the most upsetting part, I think, that both you and Claire have touched on.
That's absolutely appalling. What hope do you have? Do you have hope for the future that things can turn around, or do you think we're going to continue down the same path?
Claire, I'll let you take.
Joe, sometimes I feel more hopeful than others. I mean, I think many of us felt like we've been on an island for the last couple of years, and I'm just so thankful to Dr. Thorp and then Dr. McCullough and some of the other, Kirsten Cosgrove, our other author on this paper. I mean, sometimes it just feels so much larger than what anything that we can do individually as medical professionals. But I know there's a lot of upcoming litigation, and so I'm very hopeful because I think a lot of people not only have been killed, but they've been injured. I mean, these some of these poor people, I almost feel like the disabilities they have are worse than having passed away from the vaccine. I mean, it's just the pain they have to live with, how life-changing it is. These people deserve retribution. They deserve help financially, support. But I'm hopeful. I just I feel like we are at this point 3 years in, and I feel like we are still, the vaccines are still being pushed despite all we know now.
Thank you. Well, this has been a great interview. Thank you so much, both of you, for coming on the Kiwi Rocket. I really admire the hard work that you're doing to bring enlightenment to the public and to save lives. And I look forward to seeing more of your research. I hope you both have a fantastic day.
Well, Joe, it's such an honor and privilege to be with you down in New Zealand and to be with your audience. And I'm so grateful for you for being so bold and courageous and being a beacon of light in a world of darkness. Thank you, Joe.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Hello. Welcome, Dr. McCullough. Thank you for being on my show.
It's great to be back on the rocket. We're taking off. We have so many late-breaking stories.
Oh, I know. So there's a small case of a paper that got withdrawn. that showed with autopsies that 73.9% of people died from the COVID vaccine, and then it got withdrawn from the Lancet, and now it's back. Could you explain that, Dr. McCullough?
I'm the senior author on that paper. First author is Nick Holscher. It's a worldwide autopsy review. People who've died after the vaccine had autopsies, independent adjudication by experienced pathologists, with all the knowledge of what the vaccines do. And you're right, 73.9% of those who died after the vaccine, in fact, at autopsy, had vaccine injury syndromes. Number one was cardiovascular. The second one was thrombotic. Now, Lancet, after record downloads overnight, took it off its preprint server with no scientific justification. The manuscript has been fully peer-reviewed and accepted at Forensic Science International. Now that journal has applied pressure on the authors, and we found out that an internet troll named Jonathan Laxton, who is, in a sense, somebody who's deranged. He's on the internet wearing stormtrooper outfits and Star Wars, what have you, that he is tweeting that he himself has asked the journal to retract our paper. So I've contacted the editors and said, listen, if you're being influenced by an internet troll, someone who's deranged, this is gross malfeasance by the journal, journal misconduct. Violating the Committee on Publication Ethics or COPE guidelines will not be tolerated. The journal must capitulate and fully produce and publish this paper. It's already met peer review. It's already contracted, copyrighted. It needs to get out to the public.
Well, it's pretty serious. I mean, 73.9% death rate. The whole world needs to know about this.
I have to tell you, the vaccine here is getting deeper and deeper into trouble. We have news that now 5 states, led by Attorney General Ken Paxton in Texas, now Chris Kobach, personal friend of mine, Attorney General in Kansas, all suing Pfizer for deceptive trade practices, not fully disclosing the safety issue of the vaccine, including 1,223 deaths that Pfizer logged within 90 days of release of their vaccine, advertising that it was safe and effective, never disclosing heart damage, blood clots, or other problems. And so this is really a case of pharmaceutical fraud. Now, I can tell you in history, when U.S. state attorney generals sue these companies, they almost always settle with financial payment to the states. They don't get into the court system. And I think when other states see this, the companies, now Moderna, Janssen, and Novavax in the United States will be next. AstraZeneca will be outside the United States. They will all go through this. They've made record windfall profits. Now I think it's going to be paid back to states and countries.
It's appalling. So, Dr. McCullough, I know there's a paper out saying that synthetic mRNA may be able to be neutralized. Could you elaborate more on that?
This paper also from McCullough Foundation, Nick Holscher, it's a concept paper. 2 ideas. One is small interfering pieces of messenger RNA to basically bind to Pfizer, Moderna, shut off spike protein, or another form of a binder called ribotech. McCullough Foundation holding calls with scientists, companies, and others with the technology. Many are interested in trying to deactivate the long-lasting messenger RNA in the body. This could be a first step, but it's long ways away from being tested in humans and ultimately as a product. But we want people to know, we're working on this. We recognize many are regretful and remorseful they took one of these vaccines.
So I see this breaking news: stroke risk. COVID shots 200 times more likely to cause blood clots in the brain.
This is a breaking story. We have their lead author, Claire Rogers, led by senior author James Thorp. This is using the vaccine adverse event reporting system and comparing the COVID shots to influenza shots. Turns out half of Americans take the flu shot every year. It's considered relatively safe. 200 times the risk of brain blood clots. We're talking arterial and thrombotic clots in the brain. There's thousands of these events in VAERS. I just got contacted through LinkedIn somebody said, you can add me to the list. This poor woman had both venous and arterial blood clots. This is an absolute tragedy. I can tell you clinically in my practice, when these happen, Joe, these are disabling strokes. We're talking about people who are disabled afterwards. They, are dependent on wheelchairs and orthotics, sometimes full-time, full-body care because they've been devastated with a vaccine blood clot stroke.
Like Kayla Pollock.
Kayla Pollock has a different problem. She has transverse myelitis. She's well known. She's a Toronto young mother, child who's 8 years old. She's paralyzed due to the COVID-19 vaccines. She's received minimal care, and appallingly, the Canadian Health Service offered her MAID, medical assistance in dying. So they didn't even try to treat the transverse myelitis. And she's got a small little boy to take care of. So Kayla is well known now. She's been on my show and been on with Greg Bolden and others. She's a type 1 diabetic, COVID-19 vaccine, transverse myelitis, and the Canadian government should be ashamed of itself. In my office, we're using a new technology called Neuro 20, and it's a space-age suit that helps rewire the brain with the muscles in patients like her to get her moving. We also use McCullough protocol-based spike protein detoxification. So I had several suggestions for Kayla. We wish her the best. And you're right, this is in this category of neurologic catastrophes after COVID-19 vaccination.
So what is your opinion now about the huge spike in Alzheimer's disease?
Paper from Korea, over 4 million Koreans, half the population of Seoul, Korea, were in this. They had a good control group of unvaccinated. No doubt about it, the COVID-19 vaccines increase the risk and almost certainly the progression of Alzheimer's disease or cognitive decline. This is what we've been thinking in our practice. We've seen seniors take the shots and go into a rapid decline of Alzheimer's disease. And indeed, it almost looks like current President Biden and then former Senator Mitch McConnell may fall into the same category. People are in trouble with these shots. There again, we use McCullough protocol-based spike protein detoxification, and we add then serrapeptase, which is an enzyme that is hopefully going to help clear spike protein and cross the blood-brain barrier.
There seems to be just an epidemic of brain problems. I just wonder what's going to happen if we don't wake people up in time to the brain injuries that they are receiving. Because if people cannot process the information, how can they fight or even know there is a fight to be done? I saw today that mRNA can actually affect the amygdala as well, and that it's causing enormous psychiatric problems in some people with their brains deteriorating. It can affect the frontal lobe, the hippocampi, the amygdala, or basically just anything that exists in the brain.
Yeah, you're hitting all the major engines in the human brain, the anatomical centers, many of them actually in the subcortical regions. And physician and writer researcher Michael Nels was on with Tucker Carlson. He's published The Indoctrinated Brain. He is conjecturing that both COVID itself and the vaccines have impacted the brain because the SARS-CoV-2 spike protein has been found there. There's clearly brain fog and other central nervous systems manifestations of long COVID. And then, of course, the vaccine injury syndromes, which really have an array from ischemic and hemorrhagic stroke to Guillain-Barré syndrome to now Alzheimer's disease, as shown by Rowan colleagues in Korea. But that's a horrifying point that you're making, that if people now, in a sense, have lost their perceptiveness on what's going on, how can they possibly understand what's happening to them with this mass vaccination program?
When you've got people with executive dysfunction, even if they know what's happening, it might be hard for them to take action because it takes a lot of mental energy just to get through the day. And then if they want to take action on top of that, then they have to actually really be able to summons up the will to maybe see an attorney or to go to a doctor to get some evidence and to write something that in support of the fact that they've been injured. I think that's going to be a big challenge for many people when they're submitting on, say, the New Zealand COVID inquiry and the impact on them. They're going to need a lot of support. I know there's a lot of activists out there and there's a lot of support happening already, but I think they might need almost like health and disability workers support, and they might not be aware of it till they try and do it. I think it's a bit like putting a frog in a pot and then gradually turning up the temperature. I think a gradual cognitive decline, they might not notice, they might just, put it down to tiredness or whatever until something really serious happens. And then they realize, oh God, there's something really badly wrong with me. So I think it's cumulative, isn't it?
Boy, what a visual there. The fried brain coming out of the pandemic, both COVID and the vaccine. You're right, the support needs are tremendous. And another breaking story is the Army Reservist, Army National Guard, Carolyn Stancic, recently on a Heritage Report. I've commented it on Brianna Morello's show. We have someone who's clearly suffered a cardiac damage from the vaccine and has myopericarditis, POTS, posterior orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, needs a pacemaker, on more than a dozen medicines. Now her military paperwork indicates service connected, meaning taking the vaccine as part of military service, and because there's a vaccine injury. Service connected, if the military makes good on this is a very important bellwether case. That means health care for service connected injuries, which hers clearly is. She was perfectly healthy before this. And then also means disability payments.
Yep.
So this is potentially a very important bellwether case. Follow this Stancic case, and let's see where we go here, because people really do need help and support. So many patients now are coming through advocacy websites. One of them is called React 19. Anybody out there with a vaccine injury, consider submitting your vignette of what happened on React 19. Another one is Truth for Health Foundation, truthforhealth.org. I think if you had a vaccine injury and you wanted to be an activist, go on these sites, sign up and enter your vignette so it can become one of a list of people who have been injured from the vaccines.
So what are your thoughts on the pandemic at the moment? Is there something you'd like the public to know about?
A couple important developments that are very important for everyone to be aware of. First is Missouri versus Biden, the U.S. Supreme Court case decided on June 26, 2024. And here, in a 6-3 vote, the U.S. Supreme Court decided that the U.S. government and government agencies can be fully engaged in government censorship in social media and other forms of media to shape a government agenda. And what they said in their decision is that the case had no standing, meaning that someone who suffered censorship or reprisal in social media, they weren't harmed by that. And so if they weren't harmed by that there really is no case. Now, freedom of speech is an inalienable, it's an inherent right or privilege of those of us in westernized society. And what they're saying is, well, it's really not, and only if you're harmed would it matter. So, we have inalienable rights, which in our Declaration of Independence is our assurances that we can pursue life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And then we have our constitutional rights in the Bill of Rights, and number one is freedom of speech. So freedom of speech is tethered to liberty for sure, and to many of us tethered to happiness. So Missouri versus Biden is a dark day for free speech. Clearly Meta, which is Facebook and Instagram, Twitter, now X, Getter, Truth Social, Gab, Telegram, they are all now almost certainly going to be subject to government censorship. Joe, the real issue is, what about true independent media like the Kiwi rocket? What are you going to do when you're approached by U.S. government agents that want to alter your content? And this is going to occur across all the platforms. I think everybody in independent media needs to be thinking this through.
Okay, so before I did the Kiwi rocket, my background is in political activism. I will go old school, unless they put us into another lockdown, and do public meetings in person, hand out flyers. I've even stood in the middle of Wellington and hollered and had people gather around and listen to me while I was preaching about a political issue that I was campaigning on. You just have to go old-fashioned. Do what they did before they had technology. Face to face, even knock on doors, have a coffee meeting, invite people, sit around and talk about it. Approach other places that are not censored. Do something, you can do something, because on election day in New Zealand, you are not allowed to discuss the candidate or any policies or any political party, except to ask people if they're going to vote or not. And you have conversations where people will say something to you and you'll say, I'm sorry, I'm not allowed to comment on that. And then they'll say stuff to you and you say, I'm not allowed to comment on that. There's a ways of talking around things and saying things without saying things. Like, instead of saying that censorship is censorship, I could say it's octopus wrestling. So every time I say octopus wrestling, I mean censorship. And every time I mean government corruption, I could mean hot dog stand, with the octopuses wrestling with the hot dog stand, and the result being a big hot mess. You could use analogies, you can use plenty of ways. I'm using cartoons, songs. There are ways to get around things. And people can read between the lines. So yeah, I would just go old school and maybe make up songs, coded songs like they have in movies. Yeah, that's what I would do. There's no way that I would accept the Kiwi rocket being taken down. I would also write to politicians and put pressure on them, let people know that they're going along with the censorship. And I've got a lot of people that I know who were in the Wellington protest on Parliament lawns for 3 weeks. They camped there. And none of those people are about to back down either. So I feel pretty good if I decided to fight this face-to-face old school.
It's going to be an epic battle. There's no doubt about it. We'll see. The next civil liberty could be the right to assembly. That could be taken away as well. I was a keynote speaker at the Reclaiming Canada conference in Victoria, on stage with UK rapper, personality influencer Zuby, Dr. Drew of the Dr. Drew Show, and Dr. Jay Bhattacharya, Stanford frequent contributor on Fox News, along with myself. And the audience was packed. People were willing to come out and take time out of their weekend to learn a lot more of what's happened through the pandemic, what's happened to their bodies with the vaccines. I agree. I think there's going to be so many ways that the information will still get out, but we're going to see a distortion now in social media. Through social media, the way things are portrayed. And I think it's going to carry right through to artificial intelligence, or AI. Remember, AI is picking up all this information from the internet. If all of that is distorted, then artificial intelligence will be, in a sense, bad intelligence.
Well, there's two things I want to say about that. The first thing I want to say is that people need to keep books, physical books, because anything that you have electronically can be wiped out. I mean, all your emails, where are they stored? They're not stored on your computer. They are stored on a server that's controlled by somebody else. All your photos, best to print them out, not just have them electronic. Have some physical copies in case our access to electronics and energy gets wiped out. That's another thing. And another thing is that you've got Starlink and other things being joined up all around the world to potentially have 5G internet everywhere. Now, that's good for people who love to use the computers for work or for recreation. But the concerning thing with that is that it could lead to easy surveillance, nowhere that's safe or private on Earth, and wildlife and other people who are sensitive being affected by the radiation. So we can definitely be, technocracy. But I think that the vaccinated people will be worse off because they've already got nanotech inside them. And that has to be addressed.
Let's hope that we can find strategies to rid the body of synthetic messenger RNA. Very few people in America are taking any more of these shots. The Japanese have just approved self-replicating messenger RNA. Can you imagine a messenger RNA shot where the vaccine replicates itself in the body with no ability to stop it? I mean, that's like a horror show. Moderna's got 31 messenger RNA vaccines on the launching pad. People are starting to retract now. More and more people are walking away from all the vaccines. They've heard enough about vaccines. They never want to hear the word again, Joe.
Yeah.
I can tell you, we're heading into times where people need to watch the Kiwi rocket. They need to seek independent media, seek courageous journalists like yourself. You're leading the way there in New Zealand. You know, we have such a fond view of New Zealanders as our Kiwi friends. So, Joe, we're going to have to leave it there. I'm going to make a run and jump on national TV. Catch me over there on Fox News. It'll be June 26, 2024 at 7:35 Eastern. And you know what the topic there is going to be on the Ingram angle? It's going to be transgender medicine, yet another crisis we'll need to cover on the rocket.
Oh my God. I'm intrigued. I'm going to have to watch that. Thank you
Okay.
so much, Dr. McCullough.